Hello everyone, today I'm going to teach you about the exposure triangle. So if you're like most people and you've got yourself a brand new DSLR, the first thing that you do is you flick it onto the automatic mode and off you go and you start taking photos. And that's great, but you're not using your camera to its full potential. If you understand the exposure triangle, you can begin to start to move your camera into things like manual mode or the semi-automatic modes as well. So this is going to be the first in a series of being able to understand how to use your camera in anything other than automatic. Okay, so the exposure triangle is, as the name suggests, made up of three things: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Okay, I'm going to use an analogy by a photographer called Annie Tao. Okay, and she wrote a blog post and it helps to understand the exposure triangle. So if you think about the lens of the camera being like your eyes that see, and the camera body being like your brain, it's going to make it a lot easier. Okay, so your eyes, they will see a flower, for example, but your brain computes that it's got like yellow petals and, you know, a green stem and those kinds of things. The camera body does the same thing. The lens picks up the information, but the camera body processes it. Okay, and it processes it by way of this exposure triangle. When we talk about exposure, we're talking about how bright or dark an image is. Okay, so if we have a high exposure, it means that the image can be potentially too bright, or if you've got low exposure or underexposure, it's too dark. So the way that we control the exposure is through this triangle. So the first thing that we're going to look at is aperture. Okay, so if you think about aperture and you're thinking again with the analogy of the eyes and the brain, okay, the aperture is about how wide your eyes are and how open they are. Okay, so inside your camera, you have a whole heap of inside your lens, you have a whole heap of little rings that open and close, and that's referred to as your aperture. The more wide open the rings are, the more light coming into your body, the body of your camera, and therefore the more information that's hitting your camera's sensor. Okay? If your aperture is closed down, you've got to think like your eyes are squinting and therefore less light is getting in. So if you think about it, on a really bright day, you wouldn't go outside and stand there with your eyes wide open because it would be difficult for your eyes to focus. Same thing with a camera. On a bright day, you wouldn't be there with a wide open aperture. So aperture is measured in f-stops. Okay, so on the side of your lens, when you get one, you'll have something called an f something, and there'll be a number, something that might look like f 2.8, for example. And that goes to show how wide your camera lens is able to go, or how much low light it's allowed to, it can handle. Okay, so these can go up to things like f16. The lower the number, the more wide open your lens is, and therefore the more light that's coming in. Okay, so aperture is about how wide your eyes are. Moving up to shutter speed. Shutter speed is, as the name suggests, how fast or slow the shutter opens and closes. Okay, so the shutter inside your camera opens and closes like your eyes blinking. Okay, so if you open and close your eyes really quickly, if you blink really fast, then you might have your eyes open for 1/100th of a second, okay? You're only going to get the information that your eyes are open for. If you keep your eyes open for 2 seconds and then blink, you get more information into your brain. The same thing happens with your camera. If you have your shutter open for a long period of time, it's capturing all that information. And that's where you get things like a little bit of blur to your image or something like that. But if you're trying to keep your shutter speed quite fast, so anything above like 1/250th of a second, that's when you start to freeze motion and you're only getting a short snippet of information. The last one is ISO. ISO is like moon glasses. So ISO is your camera's sensitivity to light. So if you imagine on a bright sunny day, you can see very well everything that's around. But when it starts to, the sun starts to set and it starts to get darker, you need a bit of help to be able to see. So imagine that you've got these things called moon glasses, and the heavier and thicker the moon glasses are, the better you can see in the dark. Okay, so most cameras start with an ISO of 100. Okay, and that's quite a low ISO. That's for use on a really bright sunny day. Say, for example, you were coming inside on a cloudy day and you wanted to be able to see better, you might boost your camera to ISO 400. So my moon glasses have just gotten thicker and therefore stronger. So in turn, my camera's sensitivity to light has gotten better. Okay, so when we balance these three things, that's when we get good exposure in our camera. I hope you enjoyed.